Welcome to a TEAL Center presentation entitled Teacher Feedback in Math. Why is it important for teachers to give students feedback? When students receive useful feedback, it is validating to them. It signifies that their work is important and that their teacher is invested in their learning. Students can use the information to make adjustments, thus developing greater ownership and responsibility for their learning. Feedback provides students with a sense of their progress toward learning a skill or a concept, and therefore is a gauge of their achievement toward larger long-term goals. It helps students focus on what is important, giving them a sense of the details they should focus on, as well as identifying distracting, irrelevant information that they should avoid. Feedback downplays the right answer, helping students learn that the final answer is not as important as the thinking that goes into approaching a solution. Whether teachers provide feedback to students orally in class, written on assignments, or one-on-one in conferences, it serves to foster more and deeper thinking on their parts. And finally, when teachers provide feedback to one student in the presence of other students, it helps all students benefit from that guidance. There are multiple ways for teachers to gather information to assess student understanding and performance. The following methods can reveal student comprehension levels, concepts they are unsure of, and areas where students feel confident, as well as areas of confusion. These methods include discussion, presentations, one-on-one interviews, journaling, peer assessment, and self-assessment. Discussions can include large or small groups or pairs. A critical component of discussions is for students to construct arguments about why they approach a problem a certain way and why they think their answers are correct. Teachers should encourage all students to participate in the discussion so they can hear each student's thinking and reasoning, and they can answer questions that arise. Project presentations, or student-led thinking, provide students with a leadership role that involves explaining concepts and showing their knowledge. Teachers also can gain insight from the questions that the other students ask of their peers. One-on-one interviews allow teachers to follow up on specifics they have observed in the larger groups, to check understanding and to identify individual needs of students. Journaling helps students reflect on their learning, ask questions, and identify areas or concepts they are unsure of, and it allows the teacher to respond positively in a supportive manner to individual students' comments and questions. Peer assessment can reveal areas that students think are important, and their feedback to other students can reflect their own understanding of the concepts. Self-assessment provides information about students' perception of their own comprehension, their confidence levels, and what they think is important. There are some important considerations for teachers when providing feedback to students. These considerations relate to how and when to give feedback. Consider timing. Teachers should always provide feedback in a timely manner so that students can apply it right away, making immediate connections between the feedback and adjustments they need to make. Feedback out of context will not have the maximum positive effect. Teachers need to consider the amount of feedback they provide at one time. To ensure that the feedback is helpful and promotes student learning, teachers need to take care to avoid overwhelming students with too much information. Consider the mode. For each instance, would it be best to provide guidance orally, or in writing, or through demonstration? Consider the audience. Would it be better to provide feedback to the entire group or to the individual in a one-on-one conversation? Ensure specificity. Teachers should provide concrete ideas for improvement and next steps. What should the student consider trying to get closer to a solution? What should the student think about? Ensure clarity. Teachers should use familiar language when presenting feedback so that students can easily process the suggestions and guidance. Consider tone. teacher should convey respect for the student and his or her work, and should make comments that help students see that they can make changes themselves. One process for deciding on the feedback to give is a method called DEN, D-E-N, as promoted in the Adult Numeracy Instruction Professional Development Training. DEN is an internal thought process that teachers can use to assess what is in the student's work and how to address it with them. DEN stands for Describe, Evaluate, Next Steps, as follows. Describe what you, the teacher, see, without any evaluation or judgment. Evaluate what the student knows or understands and what the student doesn't know or is misunderstanding. Next steps on what the student does or does not know or understand. What will you, the teacher, do next to help the student? This slide presents a sample of student work on a fraction problem. The problem. The student was working on modifying a cookie recipe, cutting the ingredients in half. She was asked to draw 3/4 of a stick of butter and then to find 1/2 of that portion. Next, you can see a visual representation of the student's work. Take a moment to jot down what you see in the student's drawing. Next, write what you think the student grasps and where she is confused. Finally, write what you would do to address the confusion and move her understanding forward. Teacher thinking should always include questions such as the following. What do I see in the drawing? How should I evaluate the data? And what steps will I take next to provide feedback? The next slide provides one teacher's approach to conducting the DEN process. Teacher description of what she sees. The student draws a picture of a stick of butter and labels it as one stick. The student includes hash marks and fraction labels. The student colors in or shades a section of the drawing. Teacher's evaluation. The student is aware that parts of the stick of butter can be separated by the lines, and she is aware that each section is a certain value. However, she is lacking some conceptual understanding. For example, she lists 1/2 and 2/4 in different places on the stick, therefore seeming to imply that they are different amounts. She also mixes fractions, for example. She includes the fraction 1/3 without any connection to the other fractions, and it is not clear why she does that. Teacher decides on and takes next steps. In meeting with the student one-on-one, the teacher notes that the student had included some things that were important in her drawing, such as showing that 3/4 was bigger than 1/2. And the teacher asks her to explain why she did it that way. The teacher asks the student what she was thinking about when she drew it, what the lines meant, and what the fraction labels stood for. The student explains that she had seen fractions in the book drawn this way, and so she knew that her picture should look similar. She also says that she was able to multiply fractions on the worksheets to get the answers right, but when thinking about it in terms of the butter, she really didn't understand how big each portion would be. For example, she wasn't sure if 1/4 was bigger than 1/2 or vice versa. Using the student's drawing and verbal explanation, the teacher decides to use a manipulative to provide a concrete model. So she makes fraction strips from paper. She folds the paper into 4 equal sections and asks the students to mark and shade 3/4 of the paper. Then they make another fraction strip the size of the shaded portion of the first strip, and they fold that piece into 2 equal sections. When the student compares the 2 sizes, she can see that 1/2 of the 3/4 was much smaller than the whole stick of butter. The teacher then explains that to compare the 2 fractions, they want each piece of paper to be broken into equal-sized pieces. This makes the bigger paper 8 sections and the smaller paper 3 sections. So the student is able to see that the answer is 3/8. and she can verify that the manipulative represents the same answer as the one derived from computation. Now compare your approach to the feedback provided in the previous slide. What did you find effective? What would you have done differently? How do you think the student felt? What do you think the student learned?